Hello and welcome. This is part 4 in a series on moral tribes by Joshua Greene. This section is moral convictions. We're going to split this video up into two component parts. One is more philosophical, that's what we'll talk about first. We'll discuss the justifications for utilitarianism that Josh Greene makes, and then we'll talk about the psychological aspect of how we make decisions in trolley bridge cases. So first off, Josh Greene wants to alleviate some concerns and some common misconceptions about utilitarianism that are held by both laymen and, it seems, experts. The first being that utilitarianism is not too demanding. In fact, it is very reasonable as a reasonable philosophy. So he kind of talks about it in terms of people viewing utilitarian individuals as happiness pumps. So if you want to think of it as like, if you're a utilitarianism, the claim is you have to think about utilitarian outcomes all the time and devote yourself completely to utilitarian outcomes at every moment of every day, to the point where you can't focus on your own happiness and you have to focus on everyone else around you all the time. Living in poverty, you could say, is one implication of that. Basically never doing positive things for yourself, but more so making sure that nothing negative happens to you so that you can optimize the happiness, the degree to which people are happy around you. But Joshua Greene says, no, that's not the case at all. What the real nuanced perspective of utilitarianism would look like is saying, hey, if a graduate student in psychology, say, needed to look professional and needed to wear button-ups to look professional, so as to give the university, the classroom, the respect that it deserves, to give professors the respect they deserve, to feel better about their self, and to therefore perform optimally, hopefully, or at least give them that greater chance just because of that mindset of being professional and organized and ordered, then that would be a good thing. And it might be even necessary to be able to optimally help other people in those circumstances that you've chosen to be in. So as a grad student, if I, get 8 hours of sleep a night, which I try to do, then while I'm not using, say I could probably get by with 6 or 7 hours a night, and instead use that hour or two that I save not sleeping by helping someone else in charity. That's what, 14 hours a week up to, giving to charity. That's probably a pretty big thing, but hopefully by sleeping the extra couple hours a night and performing optimally in the classroom, this is my justification, I'll learn better, I'll be able to apply what I learned better, remember what I learned, and consolidate what I learned better, and therefore be able to actually help over a 30, 40-year clinical career, help people better than I would have if, say, I got 6 hours of sleep, was super sleep deprived, ended up dropping out of the program, and wasn't able to use what I feel and what seems to be some real talents and skills that I possess in the real world, in that profession, and instead say I'm working a job that isn't optimal for my interests and for my potential and what I can actually give to the world. Instead, obviously, doing charity 14 hours a week would still be great, but then there's still the chance that say I'm irritable at the charity events and I get burnt out of them, I am not sufficiently rested to find them rewarding, then I might discontinue helping. And so that itself would be maybe a deterrent towards not getting that rest anyway. So obviously this is a hypothetical example, and we're not going to make a philosophical proof about what the implications of that would be, but that is one kind of argument that Joshua Greene makes. He also goes into the wealthitarian fallacy, and specifically with slavery, because justifying slavery seems to be a fairly common critique of utilitarianism, because they say, and in my opinion, I think rightly so, that in certain circumstances, if you look at the world or your purpose as optimizing happiness, and there are circumstances where you can put people into slavery and optimize happiness for the rest of the world, say, then those are justified. That slavery is justified within utilitarianism. And so, like, an example I thought of was, like, say if I was made to work for code on the computer for an hour a day, which would be very boring for me, and I don't know how to code anyway, but so thankfully I wouldn't be a slave in this case anyway. But hypothetically, if I was forced to code 1 hour every day for the rest of my life, but everyone else in this hypothetical example, because of that, because we're in the future and AI is so advanced and such, they were able to live a life of peace, of contentment. They didn't have to, in this idyllic situation, we didn't have to go to war. There were no fighting. If there is a case like that is possible, or plausible, then utilitarianism would support that case. Greene says that basically, first off, wealth does not equal happiness. That's his first kind of argument, you could say, because there's a lot of people say that, or compare utilitarianism to gaining wealth specifically. They put themselves in, or put utilitarians in a kind of capitalist situation in their thought experiments and say, well, if we make these 10 people work as slaves so these other 50 people could make $5,000 a week or whatever, how is that justified? Joshua Greene would say, well, if they're making, say, we know that at around a middle income, what is it called? Medium wage, middle income, medium, like around $60,000 per year or so in the US, I think. After that point, money doesn't really bring much happiness at all. And so we could say they make $1 billion for these 50 other people instead of just 5,000 per week. But really the happiness gained from that, which is the utilitarian unit of measurement, does not actually increase much after that. So there are diminishing returns after a certain point. Whereas with slavery, that's a pretty miserable life where you're worked to do, say, really hard manual labor against your will for a long time. You aren't really able to go out anywhere and have much of a life at all. That despair and suffering is so much more intense and drastic than the happiness you had gained from that monetary investment, that it's not actually worth it to anyone who's actually reasonable in taking utilitarianism seriously, which I do think is a valid point. And so that's pretty much his main thing with defense of utilitarianism. And so basically he concludes that it is in fact at least a valid framework to work from in terms of you could say, calculating how we should go about deciding bigger problems in society. So now we'll move on to the more psychological side. He maintains his use of the trolley problems here, specifically 3 problems: the switch problem, the footbridge problem, and the loop problem. I don't think I've mentioned the loop problem in these videos yet, but I could write them on the board real quick, actually. I have up here what we'll talk about later, very last I think, which are action planes and causal chains of each situation. But in this situation, so the switch is pretty famous, obviously. You have 5 people at the end of this railway. You have a trolley right here, and yeah, 1 person right here, and you're here with a switch. You're very sad, but here's a switch, and you get to choose whether or not you pull the switch and make the trolley go hit this 1 person as opposed to the 5. And so generally, obviously, people choose to pull the switch, and we would consider that a utilitarian decision, or at least Joshua Greene would. In the footbridge case, it's very similar, except here, instead of a switch, we have a footbridge. And we are up here on the footbridge, and we're pushing, or excuse me, Bob is also up here on the footbridge. This singular track is gone. You'll put this guy up here. This is Bob. He has a big backpack. So in this situation, the footbridge situation, there again is a tram, or a tram coming up the tracks, and we are sitting up on the footbridge or the cliff, or however you want to view it, with Bob, who has a big old heavy backpack that we know that if we push him off, it will stop the tram and save the 5 people. Here, most people don't choose to push Bob, as I've mentioned in earlier videos, because of this emotional reaction and viewing Bob as a means to an end as opposed to an end in itself, which we look down upon. And so finally, the loop case, which I haven't talked about, is similar to both, but slightly more complicated. Again, we have this tram, we have 5 people, and then we have this loop that goes around back into the 5 people. That is 5 people. But we also have 1 person on the loop. So here we have our switch, and here we are. Again, we're sad because we're trying to decide whether or not to kill people. So in this case, the tram is going this way, up to the five people. And again, like the switch case, we can choose to switch the tracks into the loop, thereby averting the 5 people, but still killing the 1. This case is interesting because obviously, if this person wasn't there, the rail would, or the tram would simply go back into the main primary tracks and kill the 5 people. So in this case, again, it is more similar to the switch case than the footbridge case, which is the interesting part. Even though technically you could view this as using someone as a means to an end, because, well, I'll show you later, but we actually end up viewing it less emotionally, and therefore use a more utilitarian approach. So he starts off with his modular myopia hypothesis. The 2 main parts of that hypothesis are that there is a harm alarm, we can call it. I actually came up with that myself. It wasn't in the book. That you could say signals when you're about to make a decision that hurts someone. And then the second, you could say, premise of the hypothesis is that the alarm is blind to harmful side effects. So with a situation like the switch problem or any of these problems, the alarm lets you know when the trolley, for example, is going to hit the 5 people, but it won't tell you if you aren't using the person as a means to an end. So that's why we would have an emotional reaction to the footbridge case, where we are using someone as a means to an end, but not the switch or loop case. And so he gets into his action plans and causal chains, not his, Mikhail's. And so we have these right here. Basically, action plans are diagrams of the decision process and the considerations that we take into account for, or the components we take into account when we're making judgments on how to act morally. So, for example, in the switch case, we have these actions that lead up to a goal. The goal is, of course, to save 5 people. In this case, we have, say, pulling the switch or perceiving that the trolley is moving. In the second action, we could say we pull the switch. The third action would be the tracks actually moving. The fourth action would be the tram going on the other direction. And so in that way, there's kind of a primary line of reasoning, a causal chain of reasoning. How would I say this? If we make a causal action, behavior, perform a causal behavior, there is a line of actions, of resulting actions that occur because of that behavior. And that is the primary line of action. But because that moves the track onto another track where we don't have control of it anymore, that's when the first line of causal action, course of causal action ends, and the secondary, you could say, like a branch of the tree of causal action begins. So in this case, in the switch case, the goal is to save 5 people. The side effect would be to, which is a component of the secondary branch, or you could say the branch of the trunk, the trunk being the primary causal chain. The side effect is to kill 1 person. So because Greene's hypothesis is that because the actual killing is on that secondary causal chain, then we aren't alerted to harming someone because we don't view it as our fault. We view it as a side effect of the actions we made to achieve our goal, which we did. In the footbridge case, however, the primary line of causal chains, the primary causal chain is still the means, but when we pull it, when we push the bob off the footbridge, then we are still in that causal chain, because what we've actually done is perform a causal action that results directly in Bob being killed. We still achieve our goal, but because pushing the person is not a side effect, it's still in that first causal chain, then we view it as harmful, and therefore our alarm bells start ringing, and we feel this emotional disgust. And so when we're thinking about doing this, we take all these actions into account. We take the fact that it'll be as a means and not as a side effect into account, and therefore we have an emotional reaction to it and choose not to do it for the most part. However, the interesting part is the loop case. Basically, the means doesn't come into play until it is a part of the second causal chain, which is similar to the switch example in a way. We don't block the person until so how do I say this? With this case, technically the person is a means to an end, because we're using him to block still. Basically, we can view this case as not having a primary track at all, but we switch the, how do I say this? This is a complicated idea in some way. So when the track is going, we see that if it keeps going, it'll just kill the 5 people. But if we pull it, it'll kill 1 person, right? But we also know that there is this little loop back. So technically, the person is stopping the tram from killing 5 people, but because it's still on that same track, but because we're using them as a means in the secondary chain where we have pulled the switch already, then we don't have that same emotional reaction. And so I hope that was clear at all, but let me see if I can clear it up a little bit. Well, so we can basically say, this is an idea I had, that we practically don't even notice that within our thinking about the problem that this loop back even exists. We kind of view it as a switch problem exactly because for our purposes, whenever we kill the 1 person by switching the track, that's the end of the tram. And so we've still achieved our goal, and technically we use the person as a means to an end, but we don't perceive it as being a means to an end. We perceive it as being like the switch problem, where it's an unfortunate side effect. So that is the moral conviction section of this book. I'll be concluding soon with the final chapter, or final section of Joshua Greene's Moral Tribes, and I look forward to seeing you there.